Brad Heck.
Is that close?
How the heck are you?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm good. I'm glad we finally were able to put our schedules in sync.
Yes. Yes. I have very much a Vermont teacher schedule right now, and I know you're still on a New York City schedule, so they're a little out of sync, maybe 6 hours off.
It's not unusual, just so you know, for these things to take time. Let's get a little bit of background here first. What is your history with the Vermont College of Fine Arts, since sort of one of the main points we'll touch on? When did you attend as a master's student, and how was that experience for you? Or maybe how did you discover the program in the first place?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I'm going to have to do some backwards math to get this right. I graduated this April, and that I'm certain of. I discovered the program, so I guess that's because they have 5 semesters kind of, so I guess that, or 5 residencies. Mm-hmm. So I guess that means my first residency was October of 2016. And honestly, I discovered the program because I was teaching in October of 2016. I was hired to teach at the college I teach at now, and it had become, in the last 10 years, necessary to teach in higher education. The terminal degree has rapidly become a master's.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so I sought out a master's program, honestly, with the only intention of being able to hold on to my job teaching. I had freelanced for a long time, and I had enjoyed freelancing, but as I started teaching half-time, freelancing half-time, I really liked that security of a regular check. That was huge. And also I really found that I loved teaching, that I loved working with students and learning from students, and had the amount of self-education that teaching requires. Mm-hmm. And my position was not going to be secure. And so I started looking at programs that I was still freelancing, so where I could freelance, I could work on my own projects, I could teach, and I could be in a grad program at the same time, which basically meant low enrollment grad programs. And I had a fellow colleague of mine at the university I teach at was occasionally a visiting artist for VCFA's photography program. Mm-hmm. And he said the photography program was incredible and the writing program was incredible, and he didn't know much about the film program, but he expected it would be a high caliber, and he recommended that I investigate the film program there. So I called them, and instantly it was different than the undergrad process 10 years earlier in that, I wanted to talk to the director of the program, and the director of the program called me back immediately. And I had long conversations. It was Stephen Pite at the time, mm-hmm. and I had a long conversation with him, and I had a long conversation with the financial aid folks to try to find a way to offset the costs. And through those conversations, specifically with Stephen, I started realizing that this was a program that not only could get me that goal of being certified to continue teaching, but that also I could really benefit from it as well.
Yeah, once this thing started take shape and became a reality for you, then all of a sudden you realize, oh, wait a minute, this is more than just a practical decision.
Absolutely.
All of a sudden you're realizing there's a lot of benefits here potentially and a lot of value add.
So much so. And another concern I had was when I was applying to grad school, I was 35 or 36. And I was worried that I was going to be, 10, 15 years older than everyone else in the program, which I shouldn't, I guess, maybe be insecure about, but it was a factor. And one of the things about VCFA at that time, and I think still, is that they really encourage folks who have some experience in the field to apply. So they really at that point, they were suggesting 10 years of in-field experience before applying. Mm-hmm. And so that helped assuage my concern too. But when talking to Stephen and talking about the academic model they had and looking up the faculty and researching the faculty, I realized that, exactly as you put it, that this was a real opportunity. And in fact, pretty soon I forgot the initial intention of going there to get certified and just kind of fell into the whole academic process there.
Mm-hmm. Pretty much then found your own path. It's neat. So you found your way to the MFA program, and could you have, so that first residency in October 2016, I think you said it was?
I believe that, yeah.
Yeah, so you got there, and I guess, I don't know, were you prepared for the meeting all these wonderful faculty members they had. I mean, I know a number of them, and it's really quite an impressive grouping of people.
It's an incredibly impressive grouping of people, and I was a little bit prepared for the faculty because I could research them ahead of time.
Well, I know. I'm just trying to kind of
setting
things up here.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I was really excited about it. I knew that they were all amazing filmmakers. I didn't know that they were such good teachers or really expected them to be. But what I was totally unprepared for was how impressive my cohort was. I did not realize, I mean, in my cohort, there were folks who had dozens of films on PBS or distributed. There are folks who had Oscar nominations and Emmy nominations. And so I knew that I was getting like this incredible resource of this impressive faculty. I didn't know that the faculty were going to be so attentive to me and my projects. I didn't know that they were going to be such good teachers. And I was not at all prepared for the incredible resource that just the other students were, the cohort that I came in and left with. And I mean, it was a shock. I think Stephen or someone had prepared me that the week residency was going to be intense, and I could see a schedule, so I knew that things were scheduled from 9 a.m. till 10 or 11 p.m. But the lectures by the faculty and by the visiting artists were just incredible. And, you know, most of the production I do right now is in documentary. And so at first I tried to like only go to the if ever there was an overlap, I would go to the documentary lecture rather than, you know, narrative lecture that maybe Laura was giving or something. When I went to the narrative lectures, the lectures that were kind of outside of my focus or outside of my field, I would start going to some of these lectures on narrative or on script structure or working with actors, which are totally out of my practice. And it was just amazing how much they would shift my paradigm and how much I would learn from the faculty there and how much they had thought about it and their process and thought about a way to convey that and teach that. And some of it is just good to know because I teach, but a lot of it, like a lot of the stuff about narrative structure, a lot of the stuff about even screenwriting, I end up incorporating in my documentary work, you know?
Absolutely. A couple of things. One is Michael Moore, who I like just to name. I'd like to name drop. No, I'm kidding. But Michael Moore said to me, and he tells, I guess, young filmmakers this all the time: don't make documentary films. Go make movies.
Totally.
So that's one thing. The other thing, and I quoted that before in the podcast, so maybe listeners will be, think I'm getting too repetitious about it, but I really liked how that planted a seed in my head. I like that. The other thing is, tell me, since you brought it up, I can see, you said yourself, you're a documentary filmmaker. I know for a fact because you worked on a recent project with a sort of a sex-positive subject matter, correct? And now I can see, and I had never thought about this, but if you're taking how to work with actors or attending, let's say, a workshop or a lecture about that, and then you're going into a room with nervous or self-conscious or whatever, it doesn't even matter, maybe with subjects for a document, the talking heads, people that are going to talk to, about very personal things. This might be very helpful, I would imagine, potentially.
100%. 100%. And actually, I remember one lecture specifically by Annie Howell, who is one of the regular faculty there.
Yep.
And hers, she was specifically, I think, the focus of her lecture. It was a couple years ago, but I think it was working with non-actors in narrative fiction film. And I mean, it was just so applicable because most of it is just about ways of fostering rapport, fostering trust, encouraging vulnerability. And that absolutely transcends the medium. If you're asking, not being an expert in it, if I imagine that directing narrative film it's asking your talent to be vulnerable, to take risks.
Right.
And that is exactly what we do when we sit down in an interview, is we're asking for our subjects to be truthful and to be authentic and to be vulnerable. And I took so much from that lecture by Annie. Yeah.
And I've had on many documentary filmmakers on the show, and many of them will refer to their subjects as characters, and it makes sense because
Yes,
you are telling a story,
absolutely.
and they are your
Yeah.
characters. I mean, if you're looking at your documentary as a story, which is exactly what it is. So,
100%. Yeah, and similarly, in the structure of the VCFA residency, you have a critique. And specifically, the faculty that's in the room, it's faculty and students in the room that you get critiqued every residency. And the faculty is faculty that you weren't working with. And so I had, for example, Till and Laura in my critiques multiple times.
Till Schauder and Laura Colello?
Yes, exactly, yeah. And some of the best feedback that I've ever gotten in my life was from the two of them. And Laura especially, who works almost exclusively in narrative work and kind of hybrid cinema. Laura, her analysis and the way that she could so quickly look at narrative structure within documentary film. And Till, who works almost exclusively in documentary, he introduced me to multiple books on narrative structure that come from fiction filmmaking and screenwriting. And so all of the faculty there are just so eager and so familiar with stepping out of their discipline or out of their focus. And it goes back to the quote from Michael Moore that you opened it with, or, the topic of this discussion is when you have hundreds of hours of footage and you have to select an hour of it, you are in essence deconstructing, what you captured, the actuality of what you captured, into a facsimile of that actuality. And that's identical, I think, or similar at least, to building a narrative structure from scratch. Or at least I believe that.
Did you have an advisor?
Yeah, I actually had a different... So you are at VCFA, and I don't know if it's helpful to do this kind of introductory stuff about the program, but at VCFA, you get in. You're there for you have basically 4 semesters while you're working, and you get 4 different faculty advisors for each semester. Yeah, you can have 1 faculty advisor for 2 semesters. So you're going to have a minimum of 3 faculty advisors and a maximum of 4. And I had a different faculty advisor every single time, and the impact that they've had on my work is different. But it's all, it has made me such a better filmmaker. Having 4 distinct artistic voices and approaches and frameworks and working with them. I pretty early on made the decision that I was going to basically say yes to everything that they suggested, and then maybe say no later once I implemented a change or a suggestion, but that I was going to start with a yes. And for me, that really worked. Because a lot of the advisors that I worked with, their aesthetic or their approach or even their cinematic values were not necessarily in line with mine. But I respected all of them as artists, and I respected all of their films. And so, kind of role playing in their approach or their workflow or their method really made me a more versatile and I think stronger filmmaker.
Wow.
So I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Interesting. We're going to talk a little bit about your projects you've been working on recently or currently, but I was wondering if you have an itch to maybe someday make a narrative film.
Yes and no. Yes. Actually, I'll be transparent and vulnerable with you. Absolutely. I would love to make a narrative film. I'm at a very small university, and it's similar to VCFA in that the students really drive the curriculum and what they study.
I see.
Which means I support students in narrative work as well as documentary work. And every time I'm learning about narrative process or reading about the narrative process or working with my students, I definitely get itchy. I would love to direct a narrative piece. Absolutely.
No, thank you for being vulnerable.
Yeah, absolutely. I have so many aspirations that I sometimes end up mitigating my own dreams, I guess, at the risk of feeling let down or disappointed when they don't realize. But definitely on that bucket list is directing narrative film. Yeah, and it's only been about the last 5 or 6 years that I've been producing or directing documentary. Before that, I worked as a cinematographer.
Oh, I see.
And mostly for narrative independent films, some commercial, some television, some corporate. And so I'm familiar with the set and the set environment of a narrative film, but I am eager to learn more about the actual process of directing, etc.
Well, as a side note, I'm about to direct my first short film ever, and I'm in my 50s.
Are you really?
Yeah, and I'm in my 50s.
That's okay. So I shouldn't mitigate my dreams or my hopes. I should go for it.
Well, wait
That's
till
exciting.
after I finish, and then I'll get back to you. But yeah, I think also I wanted to I wanted to scratch for a while, and and I've had a lot of ideas, but little follow through. So, I should have joined a program like the MFA program, but I did go to a residency. I think it was just before you started, so I think it was back in 2015. I can't be sure, but I have to look. I have to look back. As I do some due diligence, I was watching some of your projects that you're working on. I know there's one documentary that is probably the most. Well, I can't say, but maybe it seems like it's. Arming Sisters. I know you probably can't talk a great deal about it because it's a project that is not part of the film program, but I know that has been something that's taken a lot of your focus and time recently.
Yeah, actually, I think I'd let you know off air, but Sunday we just supervised the final round of sound mixing, I think, which is exciting, and the colorist is still working on it right now, so it is, we're about to let go of it and release it out into the world.
Meaning festivals.
Meaning festivals. A large portion of the funding for the documentary came from Vision Media, which is one of the 5 minority consortiums under Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Okay.
And Vision Media funds specifically documentaries made by and about Native Americans. And so with that agreement comes PBS basically has first rights to the documentary and has expressed interest.
Awesome.
They express interest in broadcasting it, so there's a good chance it's going to be on PBS. But what we're just starting to learn is there are a whole bunch of different affiliates that actually distribute on PBS. And to catch the attention of one of those affiliates, you basically have to do festivals. And we want to do festivals too. We like the idea of a theatrical run. But yeah, Arming Sisters, it's a project that I've been working on, co-directed and co-produced by my partner, Willow O'Feral.
Okay,
And
I was going to ask you, so
it.
you guys are a professional and personal couple, is that what you're saying?
We are, yes,
Okay.
yes. It gets confusing to others and to us sometimes too.
I think I've got it straight.
Yeah. We both make films together and just bought a house together. So very much immersed both in personal and
Great.
professional.
Yeah.
But it's a film that it follows or profiles 6 women, 6 Native American women who are fighting for tribal sovereignty as a means to end the high rates of sexual violence against Native American women.
I was very surprised, but to read some background about this and the statistics, and that this is maybe the most vulnerable community when it comes to sexual violence. Yeah. Is that the case?
Yeah, I don't have the expertise to.
I understand.
Yes, it is the most in the U.S. It actually is in the U.S. I think it's by 2.5 times. I'm not 100% sure about that. What I am sure is that 1 out of 3 Native American women will be raped in their lifetime, and which is the highest demographic of any ethnic or racial group in the U.S. And what's even more bleak about the situation that Native American women face is that most crimes that happen in this country are intra-racial, meaning a white woman is most likely to have a white perpetrator. The only exception to that rule is actually Native women, and most violence perpetrated against Native women is actually interracial. 86% of violent crimes against Native women are by non-Natives, and mostly white men.
Now, how do you account for that? Does your documentary get to the? I know that you interview. Well, first of all, I'm jumping ahead of things. The film is also about not just the victim side of these statistics we're talking about, but also an empowerment of, right? There's an empowerment story here too. So
very much so.
So let's also bring that in. But I just wanted to maybe before or after that, I do want to find out, well, why are these particular women, why is that the case where there are such, why the rape and the sexual violence is more interracial in their case? What do we know?
Well, there's a lot of factors, but the one that the documentary focuses on is the one that most advocates and activists who work on this issue focus on, which is this idea that when reservations were first formed, they were formed as sovereign nations, which means they had the agency and for self-determination and self-governance. And then in the last 150 years since the tribal nations were formed, the U.S., through a series of congressional acts and Supreme Court rulings, has removed tribal jurisdiction. And specifically, they have removed the rights of tribal nations, with one exception, to try or prosecute non-tribal members. Which means if I went onto a reservation and committed a crime, the tribal nation, the tribal law enforcement, and the tribal courts could not do anything about that.
But they could sue you in an American, typical U.S. court.
Yes, if it were, they could take me to civil court, absolutely. But if it were a crime, if it were an assault, if it were a sexual assault, if it were larceny, if it were murder, then the jurisdiction is actually either on the federal government or, in the case of 5 states, on the local government. But on the reservation that we mostly filmed on, Fort Berthold Reservation, at times if there was a violent crime and they needed to bring in federal agents, there would be times where those federal agents were 5 or 6 hours away. Mm-hmm. And so what that has caused over time is this jurisdictional vacuum, where perpetrators actually know that they can get away with crimes against Indian women on reservations and most likely get away with it. Sarah Deer, who is a brilliant scholar and professor and lawyer and is in our film, she puts it best where she says it's not that, for a Native woman, it's not that she will get raped because her grandmother got raped and her mother got raped and so she will get raped. But she will get raped because perpetrators know that grandma's case and mom's case was never prosecuted.
It sounds like the days of slavery here in the United States.
So much, yeah.
I mean this is exactly the same kind of scenario as I'm listening to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely like there's a sub-status when it comes to jurisdictional accountability when it comes to natives living in this country. 100%. And I appreciate you bringing up the thing about empowerment, because the film is very much about these 6 women who are fighting for tribal sovereignty. And they're fighting for tribal sovereignty as a means to end rape. So they are really fighting to restore the agency and self-determination of tribes, to start holding perpetrators accountable. And so the women are all incredibly empowered, and they spend their lives dedicated to this cause or to helping other victim survivors. And there are victories in the film as well. In fact, the name comes from this workshop program by this woman named Patty Stonefish, who is Lakota Sioux, who teaches re-empowerment through self-defense to Native women. And she's one of the 6 in the film. So, yeah. This
is your directorial debut?
Yes, it is. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But Willow has previously directed a documentary called Break the Silence, which is the one that you were referring to earlier. And I had a producing role on that, but that was really mostly Willow's, which is the sexual and reproductive histories of 16 women. And so she's had a little bit more directing experience than I, but it's of this scope of a film that has 6 subjects and 300 hours of footage.
Wow.
It's definitely a first. Yeah.
Yeah, I was very impressed and moved at times. Some of the your characters, some of the people that participated have really powerful things to say. And where can people see that, or is that also going through the festivals?
Break the Silence, the
Yeah.
sexual and reproductive history. So right now, we are applying to some festivals with it. Willow is focusing mostly on educational distribution.
That makes
it's
sense.
On Canopy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's on Canopy.
Right.
And
We discussed that.
Yeah. And so there's an ability to stream it on Canopy. But she's also doing like workshops and screenings and taking it around the country fairly regularly.
Right.
You can always go to Break the Silence movie. Oh, hold on. You might have to edit in the right. breakthesilencedoc.com.
Okay.
And you'll see places that it's available to screen or watch.
I see she's a member of New Day Films, and they are all about. They're a cooperative of filmmakers who are, I guess, New Day Films distributes educational distribution, but it's done by this collective of filmmakers, and she's a member.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she is. I mean, she knows way more about New Day than I do, but I've been fortunate enough to kind of kibitz on the process. And New Day it seems like an amazing organization. You know? So much of the industry is has gatekeepers, and either you're in or you're out, and there's exclusivity to it. And New Day really is an honest cooperative of filmmakers who just want their films to be seen.
Right.
And they put the majority of their efforts and energies into educational distribution, and they've got a wide reach and a lot of good films.
And guess what?
What's that?
They make profit.
Yes, I know. The filmmakers make profit. There's actually another filmmaker company that live in Marlboro, Vermont, and they are the ones who turned us on to New Day Films, and they said it was the first time they have ever made money on a film is when they used New Day.
Yep. They figured it out.
Yeah, totally.
Some years ago, I wrote an article. I guess it was could it be their 40th anniversary some years ago? I'm not sure, but I think it was. And I wrote an article about a very journalistic approach where I interviewed different, members of the organization, and then it was published by Filmmaker magazine. So, it was.
There you go.
They asked me to do it. I mean, it was. So, but
that's awesome.
Yeah, so I have a nice connection with a number of the filmmakers that belong to New Day Films. So I appreciate that. So you have Break the Silence, Reproductive and Sexual Health Stories, Arming Sisters, and if that weren't enough, you're also been working on this project called Immersive Vermont, a virtual tour of climate change. Do you want to just speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's still a little bit in the ideation phase.
I understand.
Although
But this is good.
Hopefully going to go.
Maybe people that are listening.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Yes. But no, the concept behind it is, I guess, first of all, I wanted to make a film that I had a little bit more of a connection with. And I live in Vermont. And so trying to focus on the state of Vermont seemed like a good thing. And then also through my teaching, I've been getting more and more exposure to virtual reality and immersive video. And, at first I had a knee-jerk resistance to the technology, and honestly I think that's probably because I was worried of being made obsolete, that virtual reality was going to surpass regular traditional video, and I would no longer be valid as a teacher or a filmmaker. But I also thought that it would tend to be employed in somewhat of a gimmicky way.
Yes.
And so, but through teaching, I did a course on migrant and diasporic cinema, and through teaching that course, I chose some immersive videos to watch in class. And I realized that, yes, virtual reality and immersive video is often used for gimmicky reasons, but there are actually some things that are specific to the medium that are really good for nonfiction film or nonfiction documentary experience. And one of the things is this ability to literally transport someone to another location or another place or another experience. Uh-huh. And, climate change is something that we are all aware of. And as a culture, it seems like in progressing to an area that we are a little bit more responsible and making decisions better about it. But it's still generally a poor documentary subject, because for a lot of us, it's still somewhat abstracted and we don't necessarily feel the day-to-day impacts. And so the idea of immersing someone into areas in Vermont where the impact of climate change is tangible, and also forming a human connection with the folks who interact with that space and have them tell stories about the ways that they see climate change impacting that site. I'm hopeful will be a way to move this specter from the abstract to the real,
Right.
And start fostering, more of a connection, or more of a tangible connection.
That makes sense. There'll be a kind of much more of an immediate sort of experience in this,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited. I've been playing with VR all summer, and so far I've learned very well what doesn't seem to be working, and I'm starting to learn what does work, which is nice, just through trial and error. And yeah, the idea is we'll pick different sites in Vermont that someone has a human connection to. And for example, there's a mobile home community that's on the banks of a river that during Hurricane Irene, which devastated this state, a couple years back, it was the mobile home park was completely washed out.
Wow.
And yet a lot of folks came back and built there, even though, everyone around them is saying, you're crazy. There is going to be another storm of this level. And so just talking to the people that live there now and that's, lived through that event and finding out what motivates them and what it's like. So, yeah. Well,
you sound like you're very turned on by a lot of different things and excited and to be, it's great. Glad for the opportunity to talk to you about so many projects that you're working on, and and I hope I really hope they all succeed. They're all so important. The subject matters
very much so.
Yeah. So I'm assuming they will. I'm sure that, and there'll be great opportunity to bring you back on too. If you, I guess, summarize if you can, and if you need a moment to think of, like what. In a couple of sentences or whatever you want to say, however you want to do it, how that the program, I know we touched on it already, so this might be redundant, but maybe if you can just sort of say how it impacted you as a filmmaker, because you did say it did impact you. So
maybe I'll start just more than a few sentences, and then if it ends up being too long,
it's okay. That's why
I can repackage it. Yeah. But I mean, the VCFA program absolutely transformed me as a filmmaker. I grew more rapidly as a filmmaker in those, 2.5 years than I think at any other point in my life. And I think it was for a number of different reasons. The faculty there is so incredible and so dedicated to you as a student and as their advisee that I would often get email, they set it up so that you meet with your advisor once a month, but I would also often get an email mid-month where Nina Davenport would say, hey, I was thinking about your film yesterday and I read this article. Have you thought about this? And so I can just tell that the faculty there carry your projects with them and are fully invested to support you in them and collaborate with you in them. But also the faculty there are all so very different. They've done a really good job of getting a diverse range of artists and filmmakers there. And so spending, 6 months collaborating and talking to and getting feedback from a filmmaker who makes different decisions than you do allows you to experiment with all these different methods, all these different aesthetics and all these different processes that you normally are not pushed out of your comfort zone like that, or at least I wasn't in my career. And so there's baked into the process is this idea that you're going to experiment with things in a different way than you have before, which was so helpful to me. And then I can't speak, enough about the students. The students that I came in and out of the program with, I'm still in contact with them as friends. I talk to them regularly, but also it is such a resource as a filmmaker. If I need a lawyer, I just text a couple folks or call a couple folks and I've got the best lawyer in the business. If I had a question the other day about registering for copyright and immediately got a bunch of responses. Anything from crew to technical issues to creative issues. There were 3 or 4 students from my cohort that gave me feedback on the fine cut of Arming Sisters that I was working on. And so it is such a resource of faculty and such a resource of students there. I mean, it's a real community. It's a real community that transcends the 2-year academic experience. And so, yeah, I mean, I would go back. I would love to go back and study screenwriting or study narrative film or I would go there for as long as I could afford to. Absolutely.
That's great.
Yeah.
Terrific. Well, thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. I hope this was all right.
It was better than all right.